why do we go to work and spend 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours a day doing this thing? People will give you superficial answers at first, and then you got to be that 7-year-old kid and go, but why? But why? Until they get down to a place where there's no more whys. They get down to a place where they're telling you what really is driving them to do the thing that they do for 8, 10, 12 hours a day. And that's going to be about creativity. It's going to be about family. It's going to be about finance. It's going to be about some combination of all of those. It might be because it's a purpose-driven job where they're trying to save the planet. It might be all kinds of things, but that answer is really a value jumping up and saying, this is something that I'm using to make this important decision about why I'm going to spend 10 hours a day doing this thing. That's the thing you need to listen for.
You're listening to the Sales Today podcast, and I'm your host, Fred Copestake. On this podcast, we explore how sales professionals can develop a modern approach to winning business, the application of virtual selling techniques, how to create meaningful business relationships, and much more. Why not take our free collaborative selling scorecard to see how your sales approach suits today's environment? You'll find a link in the show notes. And welcome to this episode of the Sales Today podcast, where I'm delighted to be joined by David Allison. David is a human values expert. Some have said activist, which we'll come on to in a little bit, and founder of the Value Graphics Foundation, founder of the Value Graphics Foundation. Project.
But foundation, that's maybe in the cards at some point. We'll have a global foundation doing beautiful, important work all around the world.
In 2 minutes of a podcast, you've stepped up from being an expert to an activist and a project to a foundation. How about that?
Yeah, that's great. I'm going to come back every day. Who knows? Tomorrow I'll be the king.
But you don't hang around, do you? I mean, the reason that we're talking is that you've just published your second book.
I have.
You are one of the few second-time guests on the podcast because we spoke pretty shortly after your first book. So this second book, I've read it. I loved it. So tell us a little bit about it. What's it called?
Sure. It's called The Death of Demographics. And the subtitle is Value Graphic Marketing for a Values-Driven World. And it's all about, expanding in many ways on what the first book, which was all about, the first book was called We Are All the Same Age Now. And it was based on data we had for Canada, the United States. So we've collected primary data that showed that values are a more effective, efficient, and important way to understand the people you're trying to engage and motivate and activate than using demographic ideas and psychographic data about how they've already behaved so far. So that was cool. And we got that book done, and it allowed us to do a bunch of work. And that money we used to say, why don't we just have the same data for the whole planet? So now we have the database, the Value Graphics database built for the population of planet Earth. We've done 750,000 surveys around the world with a team of translators in 152 languages. We've read every single response. We've coded them all, put them all in this massive database. And now for the first time in history, we have an accurate global picture of what everybody on Earth cares about deep inside their hearts, what their core human values are. So even if the story stopped there, the fact that we now can see what everybody on Earth is driven by and what's in our hearts, what we truly deeply care about, that's a pretty astounding thing. And I sometimes just stop and feel that if that's my legacy, that's good enough. But of course, as they say, but wait, there's more. So we have things to do.
We'll come on to that later, but even just that surveying process, I mean, you talk about that in the book, where that in itself is quite an endeavor, isn't it? Because when you say you're employing people, now you might have to pick me up on my poor understanding of the process, but it's qualitative, so it's looking at word answers as opposed to just people ticking boxes, if I'm correct.
Well, it's technically called qual-quant, so it's qualitative and quantitative. Some of the answers are, rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10, but a bunch of the answers are also, how do you feel about this? Or what would it be like if this happened to you or that happened to you? So long form answers. And the thing about long form answers, when you do them at scale, is you start to see patterns. There's only so many ways that people, because we're all human, there's only so many ways that people are going to answer a certain kind of question. And so if you have enough answers from enough people around the same kinds of questions, we just dump all that data out on the dining room table and look at what everybody's saying, and you go, wow, isn't that interesting? Everyone's using their own words, but 57% of the responses are kind of around these subjects, and they're more or less saying this thing, and there's 10% that are kind of saying that thing. So the responses, the data tells you how to sort it out, and then you can attach numbers to those long form answers. So now you end up with a database that's entirely quantitative, but it's been built from this combination of qualitative and quantitative responses. So it's, there's only so much humanness that you can get from polling people entirely in a quantitative way. If every single thing you ask them is a score of 1 to 10, or true or false, or agree, disagree, somewhat disagree, really disagree, get out of my life, I hate you so much. Like if that's the only way that you're collecting information, you lose humanity in those answers. You lose nuances in those answers. So it's important, I think, if you're going to do things at scale, to have a little bit of both.
Yeah, humanness is such a cool word, and the thing that you said just before that, which is that you're understanding what people actually care about, and this is exciting, because I guess the reason that you're saying that demographics is dead is it's because if we're not really talking about what people care about, we're just sort of saying, well, they're a millennial because they're this age, and so they are going to care about this. Let's market them this mobile phone with this special feature on it, just because they're X years old.
Yeah, and it's all we've had, for the longest time. It's all organizations, salespeople, marketers, product development teams, anybody who's trying to understand human behavior for whatever ends. All we've had to look at groups of people and try and figure out who they are and what they're going to do is we've had demographics, which are still a great tool to describe what some people are. But the problem is we've been also thinking that once we've described what people are, that we know who those people are. And of course, that's where it all falls down, right? A room full of 50-year-old men who make $100,000 a year. What have they got in common? They're 50, they're male, and they make $100,000 a year. That's it. To say that, well, therefore they're going to like Formula One racing, or they're all going to be into basketball, or that's where it starts to fall apart. But that's what we've been doing. We've been using demographics like some sort of business astrology and saying, well, let's look at the crystal ball. We know how old they are. And, the moon was in, and this was happening and the tides were, and so therefore it's probably more accurate, in fact, to be using astrological science to talk about business. We're marketing to Geminis. That's probably going to get you better further ahead than saying we're marketing to 50-year-olds. Anyway, so that's all we've had. And, there's this other kind of data called psychographic data, where it's all about how people have behaved so far. What have they bought? How have they felt? What's their preferences? What are their likes, their emotions, all that kind of stuff. And it's all good. It's all information that helps you sort of see patterns in what human behavior has been, but it's all from the same place. But all of it comes from exactly the same place, which is the past. Because if you know it, you can write it down. It's already happened. So it's old. The moment you write something down, it's historical. So all of that data about previous behaviors and emotions and ideas and sales patterns and all of that kind of stuff, it's all historical. And what we're all trying to do as salespeople, marketers, product development people, fundraising folks, HR companies, whatever it is we're doing, we're trying to figure out what people are going to do next, because that's what we're interested in. How do we get them to buy our thing, say yes to our idea, become part of our whatever? It's about what happens next. So history can only take you so far. Demographic, that's psychographics. Demographics describes, puts a fence around the people that you're trying to engage with here. But until you also know what's in their hearts and how they go about making decisions, you're kind of got a two-legged stool. It's not very sturdy. You need a three-legged stool. You need that third leg of value graphics, because people chase their values. That's a neurological fact. Our brains are hardwired. It's the only way, in fact, human brains know how to make decisions. Human brains use our values to make every decision in our lives. We don't get a choice. You don't get to switch it on and off. Your values determine everything you do. So now that we can measure those values for a group of people and say, this group of people have these demographics, these past sales behaviors, and they will be motivated by anything that has to do with the value of ambition, personal growth, and social standing. Well, now you know what to say to them, what to create for them, what to put out there in the world that'll attract them like a school of fish. That's what we're trying to do here. And with this new kind of data, this third kind of X, demographics, psychographics, value graph X. Once we add the value graphics to the mix, well, you're all set. You've got what you need to get those folks to, be the school of fish you want them to be.
Well, it's the school of fish now, is it?
Well, I don't know. I just made that up,
Well,
your schools of fish, there's like, they all move like a pack like that. Well, I think values will get your target audience to do that. So it's not a bad.
I remember the phrase you used when I spoke to you last time. It still sticks with me, and I still think about it when I'm trying to get my messaging right. You said it's like it's like giving, it's like putting a snack in front of a dog. They can't help but go and eat it.
I forgot that I even said that one, but I'm going to bring that back into the repertoire now because I think I like that. I like that.
Well, it stood the test of time. It's
it's the right snacks for the right dogs.
Like they said, it's like putting a snack in the same room as a dog. They can't help themselves but go and eat it. And in my mind, that's translated to a Scooby snack.
Yeah, that's
Make your sales messages like Scooby snacks.
I'm gonna steal that one back.
Have it back. It's yours
again. Okay, cool. Thank you.
No, but I mean, this is we're having a giggle, but this is really important because what you're talking about is whether it's a school of fish, it's a snack in front of a dog. It's that you are directing them and you're attracting them. They're doing stuff which they can't help. Is what you were saying. It's just what they're attracted to.
Because when you get to that point, whether I know most of the people listening to this and watching this are in sales, but just think about any aspect of your life at all. When you get to the point where you know someone so well that you can kind of guess what they're going to do next, that's when you really, truly can be a great salesperson, because you know what it is they need to hear, what they're looking for, and how you can satisfy them at that deeply human level. It's not just about getting your next commission. It's about how can I help these people solve the problem that they have in front of them? Well, how are they looking at the problem is really what value graphics can help you understand. You're selling, let's say you're selling a car. One person might be wanting to buy that car for, safety and efficiency and, a new job they have where they have to travel outside of town and sometimes the weather isn't all that great. And someone else may actually be looking for something that boosts their social standing a little bit and makes them look a little sexier and a little more exciting. And someone else might be looking for a vehicle for an entirely different. So what's the root cause of what they're looking for? That deep-rooted, heart-level, resonant reason why they will make a decision about anything in their life. If you can identify that, here's a great way to think about it. When you're on a trip, sometimes you're on vacation or you're away for a conference or something, you meet someone. Usually happens when we're away for some strange reason. You meet someone you've never met before, you start to talk and you're like, I feel like I've known you my whole life. I was just like, you're fast friends. You're like, I can finish your sentences. We've all had that happen, right? And if that person said to you suddenly, you know what, let's do something crazy. Let's go bungee jumping. You'd be like, okay, let's do it. Because of that connection at the values-based level. That fast friend knows your values and you know theirs, and you see that kind of heart level connection with each other. And then the next day, same person, same conference, whatever you're at, you see your new fast friend and they go, oh, I had a really bad phone call from home. Something not good happened. Somebody's sick or just some bad news. Well, because you've connected with them at that values-driven level, you'd know how to help them out. You'd know how to make them feel better. You'd know exactly what you needed to say to make that situation better. That's what fast friends are all about. Now imagine if you could do that at scale. Imagine if your marketing could be that level of connection with the people you're trying to engage. The one-on-one sales effort that you have in front of you right now, that person who's in front of you, that you can get as close as possible to that experience of being fast friends. The trick is to be able to look at the world, one person or a group of people, and understand what's in their hearts. And we've been trained in the work that we do as salespeople, marketing people, business development people, whoever it is you are, we've been trained to look at people based on demographics. Old people are like this. Young people are like that. People in the middle are like this. If they're rich, they're poor, they're black, they're white, they're gay, they're straight, they're male, they're female, they're educated, they're uneducated. That's therefore meaning to us that we need to treat them this way or that way. And it couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, the data and the database backs this up. Now that we've done the whole world, this is a cool new thing that we've discovered. If you look at any one of those demographic labels we're also familiar with, age, income, gender, marital status, number of kids, educated, blah, 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 blah. And you look at the number of times people within one of those cohorts, one of those buckets, how similar are they to each other? In other words, how true is a stereotype going to be about people who fit that description? How targetable are they with a message or a sales pitch or a sales language? The answer across the board for the planet, with more accuracy than you need for a PhD, is on average 10.5% similar. So that means if you spend $1 trying to track someone based on what you think you know about them demographically, you got at best about a 10% chance it's going to do anything for you. It's why we get so excited when we send out an email direct campaign or a direct letter campaign and like a 3 or 4% response rate. We're like, woohoo, this is amazing. That's actually a 97% fail. And yet we think it's fantastic because we're using the wrong tools to figure out how to talk to people. We're sending out demographic messages to demographic groups who at best are going to be about 10% aligned. So instead, put people in groups based on what their hearts, what makes them similar inside their hearts. What are the values they have in common? And when we do the math on this, we see the similarity in those cohorts, those buckets of people. It gets as high as 89%. So now in this hypothetical best case scenario, you send out that same direct mail piece, but value graphically targeted instead of demographically targeted, you have a chance of getting 8x on your effort. You could get an 89% open rate. That's an 89-cent dollar you're spending instead of a 10-cent dollar. And even if it's half wrong and it's only a 45-cent open rate or a 3/4 wrong, you get a 20, you get twice as good as what you're getting now. When all you have to do is think about people a little differently, why wouldn't you? Is the question.
I mean, to be fair, that sentence you've said, I could just stop you at think about people.
Yeah.
That will be a big start or a big improvement in many cases.
Yeah.
Think about them a little differently. So again, pick me up. You will pick me up, I'm sure you will, if I've got the language slightly wrong here. But is what you're talking about a really deep rapport with people? Am I using the rapport word correctly? Is that what we're doing there?
Yeah, I like that. Yeah,
so,
building such a great, like your fast friends, like this,
the level
this
of connection, your fast friends rapport. Yeah. So in some ways, you must be quite heartened that the sales world is moving this way now anyway, because people are starting to talk, brackets, again, about personality profiling. There's some great tools out there which is saying, let's start to really think about, how people think, what their preferences, the stuff that got trained in the 60s.
Yes.
but it seems to having a bit of a renaissance, and that's got to be a good thing.
It
but
is.
What you're saying is, but that's a step. You could be sprinting off into the distance if you go down this route.
Bingo. Because
Right.
all of that stuff you're talking about, the personality profiling. So what are their preferences? What are their likes? What are their, hates? What are their, all that stuff? Two things. It's mercurial. It changes all the time. So, there's these studies people do, they're called brand emotion studies. And you see, the media loves writing about these. So I'll say things like Nike is the most loved brand in fill in the country here. And then you sit back and realize that what they've done is they've talked to, I'm sure, a whole lot of people. I'm sure it's statistically accurate, and said, here's a list, or tell us what your favorite brands are. Here's the thing about human behavior. It's messy, illogical, irrational, and emotional. So the next day, if they asked those same people that same question, if they liked their shoes that day, they were like, wow, Nike's amazing. And the next day, their shoelace broke. Like, I hate Nike. It's my least favorite brand. And so we can't look at any of that information other than a snapshot of a moment in time. It's like, okay, cool. This is our preferences, our likes, our emotions, our feelings, our all that stuff. It's about right at the moment when they asked that question, it was true. 10 hours later, 2 hours later, 5 minutes later, it could be not true now. It's going to change all the time. And where all that stuff comes from, the reason you love Nike or hate Nike or prefer this or prefer that is because it's aligned with a set of your values. It's the only way humans know how to make decisions, remember, is values. So all of that stuff is rooted in values. And values, they don't change. You get them when you're a kid, and they're yours for the rest of your life. So great, figure out what people's personalities are, what their preferences, their likes, their emotions, all that stuff. It's all good to know. It isn't going to hurt. Realize, though, the danger is it's a snapshot of a moment in time. It's going to stale date quite quickly. And then further realize that if you really want to get to the root cause of those behaviors and preferences and emotions, you need to understand where it's coming from. And where it's coming from, when you get down to that level, the values level, you're on stable ground here, because that stuff's not going to change. If you know that your sales targets are all motivated by health and well-being, that's never going to change. So you could talk to them about product A today, and what you need to do is connect the dots to health and well-being. What is it about this product going to make you feel like you're having the right choices for your health and well-being? However you define that in your life, this is going to give you what you need. And then tomorrow you're talking about product B. As long as you come back to health and well-being, you're never going to go wrong, because health and well-being drives them at that root level. So this is really about, you know how like 6 or 7 year old kids, they keep going, why? Like, oh, well, the sky's blue. Why? Well, because gases in the atmosphere and the light refract. Why? Like if you just keep going down and down and down, it's like, people prefer this thing. Why? Well, because they said that on the survey we asked them. But why? Well, you'll get down finally, if you talk to these folks, to a level where they're telling you, well, the reason I prefer that is because friendship is really important to me. And this is a way for me to feel like I'm honoring my friends. Or health and well-being is one of the most important things in my life. They'll have different words for it, but I mean, we have our 56 values, we have labels we use, but people will say things and you'll be able to put it into one of those buckets.
And so this is how sales and marketing people, and let's put them together. You write for marketers, I talk to salespeople, and that's a different podcast about they should talk to each other. But anyway, it's about identifying those things that are important to those people that we want to speak to, getting the message right to talk to them about that. And for me, the next jump would be, well, actually, the easy way to get that right is to get someone who shares that value to be talking to them about it, because then they don't have to work that hard at it.
We've been having some
They're
fascinating
fast friends
conversations
talking to each other.
Yeah. We've been having some fascinating conversations about there's a term for this in the sales world that I'm not remembering, but basically, how do you decide which salespeople should talk to which customers?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's based on seniority. Well, these are our best customers. You're our best sales guy. So lucky for you, you get to talk to the best customers. You're the newbie. You get the hard cases, like whatever, there's a system to assign people to people, right? What if
zip code,
zip code sometimes. Yeah. I mean, it's as logical as that, right? But there are some progressive organizations out there that are trying to do a little bit better job of matching up the right salespeople to the right prospects. But if you could figure out how to do that based on values, so that the first time you have contact with a prospect, you're just like, let's go have a drink. You're amazing. You're going to see each other's values in each other. That's going to be the most productive way to assign sales to sign prospects to a particular salesperson. So there are methodologies that we could use to make that happen. They're long and involved, but for anybody listening today, the closest you can get to that without a big engagement with my firm, which if you've got some money and you want to talk about that, please get in touch. But for just everybody who's listening today, there's 3 questions that we've tested over time in all kinds of different ways to make sure they work. I'll give you these 3 questions. We call them the 3 telltale questions. And the 3 telltale questions are a way for you to kind of get a bit of a read on the people you're talking to. You could do it through a survey if you're trying to figure out like what are the group of people, what are kind of the themes that they're going to have around their answers here. Or if you're doing it on a one-on-one basis, you got to find a way to do this so it doesn't sound like a scripted set of questions. Just kind of weave it into the way you're talking to them and doing the small talk thing. But if you can get to these 3 questions, and then what you're listening for is the themes that will bubble to the surface. Everyone's going to have a similar way or a dissimilar way of answering these, but you'll hear patterns, and those patterns will be pointing you to what the core values are. So it'll be easier to understand if I actually tell you what the questions are. So the first question is, why do you go to work? Now, if you're doing that 101, you want to slide that in somehow and talk about why you go to work, and then maybe ask them like, what about you? Why do we go to work and spend 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours a day doing this thing? People will give you superficial answers at first, and then you got to be that 7-year-old kid and go, but why? But why? Until they get down to a place where there's no more whys. They get down to a place where they're telling you what really is driving them to do the thing that they do for 8, 10, 12 hours a day. And that's going to be about creativity. It's going to be about family. It's going to be about finance. It's going to be about some combination of all of those. It might be because it's a purpose-driven job where they're trying to save the planet. It might be all kinds of things, but that answer is really a value jumping up and saying, this is something that I'm using to make this important decision about why I'm going to spend 10 hours a day doing this thing. That's the thing you need to listen for. So then the second question, you just won the lottery. Why would you give away half of it? The same thing's going to happen. They're going to go, oh, I give it to, leukemia because my aunt is like, no, not where. Oh, I'm sorry to hear about your aunt, but not where, but why would you give it away in the first place? Well, because I want to make good things happen in the world. Why? Because the world's a messed up place and good things need to happen. Well, why do good things need to happen? Just keep going. And eventually they'll get to a point where there's no further answer. Like that's the base level root cause of why they would give away half of their lottery winnings. And then the third question is my favorite one, and it doubles as a great party question. So next time you've got like a dozen friends around a dining room table somewhere and you've all had at least 2 glasses of wine, pop this one out and watch what it teaches you about people who you think you know. So here's the question. You get to send a letter to yourself from 10 years ago in the past. What would you say? And more importantly, why would you say those things? Now, same thing. They're going to tell you all kinds of stuff that sounds surface level. You got to just be that 7-year-old kid and go, why, until you get to the bottom and you start sounding like Simon Sinek after a while. Why? But what you're trying to get to is that level of root driver behind something as important as what's the message you'd like your 10 years ago self to know. So if you're doing this one-on-one, ask 1 or 2 of those questions. You don't want it to sound weird and creepy, but like at some point, there's going to be a way you can kind of slide that stuff in. And that's what you're listening for. If you're doing it with a group, same thing, like sending out a survey monkey, or, one of those tools named after an ape that you use to poll people, MailChimp, survey monkey. Somebody needs to do like quiz orangutan. There's like all kinds of different places that could go. You're listening for that similarity between answers. What you want to hear is a bunch of your people who are responding. Let's say you send it out to 1,000 folks. You want to see how many of them end up saying something to do with the environment, something to do with family, something to do with, status and ambition, something. And then you can start to see that for the majority of the folks you're paying attention to and you're trying to understand, that these are the values you need to be focused on. And then you can just start being that for them. Connect the dots back to between whatever it is you're trying to sell, whatever it is you're trying to get them excited about. Frame up that story in a way that pitches directly into those values, because that's what will move their hearts. That's what will move the needle. That's what they wake up in the morning looking for more of in every single decision they make all day long, because they're human and it's the only way humans know how to make decisions. So if you can get that input, you're set up.
Awesome. That is so cool. If I can't pick up the next question to ask from this, then I need sacking as a podcast presenter, podcast host, which is, I could talk about this all day, but we want to try and keep this, keep it short, keep it punchy, keep it usable. But I've got to ask you about your why. Got to ask about that and why you're doing this stuff, and then how that manifests. Because I've read about it in the book, and it's awesome. I just love to hear you say it.
Yeah. Well, I come from a marketing background, and it's great to suddenly have the answers to like this really big question I've had for a long time, which is why demographics suck and they are so terrible at helping us identify people and what motivates them. So now we know. So it helps businesses be as much as we talked about. It's an 8x on every dollar an hour that you spend in marketing or sales or product development, HR, CX, UX, whatever you want to talk about. Anytime you're looking to try and get a group of people and understand how you can engage with them and motivate them, you need to get down to that level of values. And now we have a tool that makes that empirically possible. So that's amazing. That's a big step forward for the world. But even more importantly is this. I see this as a kind of Trojan horse. The business community has the loudest voice on the planet. There's more businesses than there are politicians. It has more money to send messages and create products and change what's going on in the world. So if slowly but surely I can get the business community to buy into this way of looking at people, a really important thing will happen. We will stop using demographics as a way to understand people, because they lead to all kinds of nasty problems. Not only do they not work, remember, there's only about a 10.5% similarity in a demographic cohort. So they're not really doing us a lot of favors. But on top of that, they're normalizing demographic perspectives on people. It says to each other and to the world and to everybody that sits in the boardroom with us and is involved in our companies that the right way to think about people is based on how old they are, because that's ageism. And the right way to think about people is based on whether they're male or female, because then that just leads to sexism. And when you start talking about who they choose to love and what color their skin is, and all of these demographic labels have a correlative social problem that they're fueling. So the longer we keep using demographics, the longer we're going to continue to grapple with ageism, sexism, racism, homophobia, all of these things that we're not doing a really good job getting our heads around and trying to address these systemic problems that these things create in the world. So if we stop using demographics to understand who people are, keep using them to understand what people are, but you stop using them as a way to label people based on what we think they are on the inside, well, then that's removing those demographic stereotypes, and that's turning the volume down on all these terrible problems. And so it's a win-win-win. Things are better for us, they're better for our companies, and slowly, surely, incrementally, things get better for the world. And if I can finish my turn on this rock spinning around the sun, knowing that I've at least started a shift in that direction, away from these outdated ideas about women are like this and men are like that, and young people versus old people, all this binary divisiveness that's inherent in a demographic view of the world. If I can just feel like I've begun a march in a better direction, I'll be very, very content with what I've contributed in my limited time here. So that's what drives us.
Oh, wow. Awesome contribution. I hope, no, I'm sure you will have spoken to some people values listening to this, who will be wanting to get in touch with you. How do they do that?
Well, I'm really shy. It's hard to find. No, I'm kidding. I'm like the least shy guy in the world. I'm on a mission, my friend. We got to get out there and change things.
It's a secret
So
mission.
I mean, you want to get really direct about it. The easiest way to find me is Google David Allison, and you're going to find me, I promise you. But if you want to find me on social, I tend to hang out most on LinkedIn. And we try and share as much information as we can that we think people will find useful on that channel. We also have two different websites. One is for the research company. It's called the Value Graphics Research Company. And the website there is just valuegraphics.com. And then my work as a speaker and an author, that's all kind of bundled up on a different website that's davidallisoninc.com. So depending on whether you're interested in me as an evangelist as an activist for values as a way to help heal the world, or you're interested in this from a business perspective, valuegraphics.com, davidallisoninc.com, choose your poison.
We will pop the links into the show notes. And yeah, if you're listening and you do connect on LinkedIn, mention that you've heard David on this podcast.
Yeah.
David,
buy the book. Buy the book. We got to do a book plug.
Oh, we got a book plug. That's the whole point. We had one job.
We had one job.
We ended up trying to save the world.
Okay, book plug. Book plug is called The Death of Demographics. You can find it on amazon.uk, .com.ca, .jp, a whole bunch of other dots. So Death of Demographics, grab a copy. I make like $1 a book, so it's not going to make me rich, but hopefully it'll make you rich because it'll help you understand how to talk to people in a more productive way.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. I'm glad we got that in at the end, otherwise we'd have failed. No, I mean, the bigger mission is massive. But yeah, get the book. It is worth it. I've read it. It's very practical. It does get you thinking. So thank you so much for coming on again. Really good to see you.
Likewise.
Thank you for listening to the Sales Today podcast with me, your host, Fred Copestake. I hope you've enjoyed what you heard today. If you did, please get in touch and hit subscribe. And remember, you can take the Collaborative Selling Scorecard for free to check out how your sales approach works in today's environment. You'll find it in the show notes.